The Silverwing Battalion, basically the Avengers of this world, was trying to take down a gigantic ice dragon. The beast whipped its tail like a kid swatting flies, but the party dodged and spammed their strongest spells. Zero damage. It was like throwing snowballs at a fridge. Then the dragon exhaled a breath so cold it could cancel summer. The team's mage threw up a barrier, but it cracked like cheap glass. Just before she got turned into an icicle, the team's cook Dennis dove in. Yes, the cook. Not the tank, not the paladin, the guy who usually makes stew. He blocked the blast, patched her arm with a healing potion on the spot, and even gave her a pep talk. Katie, the vice captain, smiled at him. Vigo, the captain, just looked like someone stole his lunch. In a jealous rage, Vigo stabbed the dragon's eye. It went berserk and fired dark lightning everywhere. The group tried one last combo attack and had to retreat. Back at HQ, Vigo called a meeting. Katie's chair was empty. The mood was awkward. Dennis politely asked why they were there. Vigo blamed him for scaring the dragon off with his dread voice skill. Dennis reminded him it was his idea. Vigo denied it like a crybaby. Everyone else stayed silent, pretending to be furniture. Then Vigo called Dennis, just a cook. Dennis powered up his magic butcher knife, stopped himself. Instead, he slammed the table and said he was done. He walked out, muttering about opening a restaurant. On the way out of the city, a little girl dropped her balloon. Dennis caught it like a hero and told her not to let go of important things. Vigo watched from the shadows with the kind of smile villains practice in mirrors. Katie ran after him, begging him to stay or at least cook a farewell dinner. Dennis refused. He told her someone else could handle potions and meals. He thanked her, said goodbye, and left for good. In a small town, Dennis started his ex-adventurer chef dream. A shady shopkeeper tried to sell him an overpriced icebox. Dennis remembered he had ice magic and said, nah. He followed his How to Open a Restaurant for Retired Adventurers guide to the letter, bought cheap gear, and thought about hiring help. Then he saw a noble girl being auctioned as a slave. He tried to walk away, but her eyes reminded him of himself. Next thing he knew, he'd spent all his money buying her freedom. He gave her clothes, food, and freedom. She introduced herself as Atelier and soon started helping him clean and cook. Dennis named the place Adventurer's Restaurant. Broke but hopeful, he opened his doors, yelling for his first customer. Right on cue, an adventurer in retro armor stepped inside. Dennis nearly drops his ladle when he sees his first customer, a walking tin can. He remembers the "don't scare off customers" rule from his guidebook, so he just smiles and tells Atelier to bring some water. The knight sits quietly and studies the menu. Dennis stares at them like a cooking show judge, expecting a crazy challenge order. Instead, the knight shyly points to a small rice bowl with a topping. That's it. Dennis asks if they want anything else. The knight shakes their head. Then Dennis realizes, broke adventurer alert. He sighs and decides to make a hearty katsudon anyway. But when the knight protests they can't pay, Dennis snaps, a strong person needs to eat well. Then he pauses. The voice inside the helmet sounds like a woman. Sure enough, a few minutes later, she lifts her visor and introduces herself as Henrietta. Over food, she spills her story. Her old party ditched her because she's a woman and a burden. Dennis rolls his eyes. She's level 23 and still swinging a sword better than most. Henrietta fangirls over Silverwing's vice captain, the legendary Crimson Swift Sword. Dennis mutters something about her being a pain and immediately pretends he said nothing. She explains she's been hiding her gender, trying to join parties without speaking. Problem, it's hard to get hired if you never talk. Now she's broke and jobless. Dennis gives her the katsudon for free and tells her to enjoy it hot. She devours it with sparkly eyes and stuffed cheeks, calling it the best food ever. He promises to ask around for a party. Soon a group of guys comes in, loves the food, and comments on the cute waitress. Atelier shows no emotion but clearly glows inside. When Dennis hears the men talking about their next adventure, he pitches Henrietta as a strong swordswoman. They instantly agree to take her on. Dennis is a bit surprised by how fast they accepted, but Henrietta is thrilled. That night, Dennis overhears a rumor about a shady group of men who lure solo female adventurers and assault them deep in dungeons. It makes him think of the same four guys, but he hopes he's wrong. Next day, Henrietta joins them. At first, everything looks fine. She slays monsters, they praise her, but deeper in the dungeon, they reveal their true colors, stun her, and start removing her armor. Just as she loses hope, a boulder smashes into one of them. Out of the shadows steps a monster-looking figure with 2 butcher knives and a sack over his head. The monster moves too fast to track, floors the men, and leaves them tied up outside the dungeon with their bounties exposed. Henrietta wakes up later at the guild, realizing she was saved by a buff chef with cleavers. Back at the restaurant, she admits she should have listened to Dennis's warning. Her stomach growls, she's still broke. Dennis tells her to order whatever she wants. She shyly picks the most expensive steak set. Dennis panics but serves it anyway, even giving Atelier the evening off to join her. As they eat, regular customers stream in, calling for their usual gratin. Henrietta watches Dennis cooking and thinks he looks a lot like her mysterious hero. But before she can ask, the door opens and another customer walks in. Next morning, Henrietta is still in talk radio mode, chattering away at Dennis while he chops vegetables. When she finally asks him a question, he blinks and says he didn't even realize she'd been talking to him. He quickly changes the subject to food. She orders sorcery ramen. While the broth bubbles, Dennis casually circles back to her question and asks why she hides her gender. Henrietta doesn't really have an answer. He tells her to just do what feels right and slides over the steaming bowl of ramen. Something clicks. She gets up, borrows the back room, and re-emerges minus the heavy armor in a whole new outfit. Even Atelier gives a rare approving nod, making Henrietta blush. She digs into the ramen like it's a religious experience. Dennis smiles, then ruins the mood by reminding her she still needs to find a party and pay off her tab. The door opens mid-fuss and in walks a shiny new adventurer who hides behind the menu. Dennis squints, unsure if the customer is a pretty boy or a cute girl. The guest asks what's good. Dennis confidently says everything, which of course makes it impossible to choose. He recommends his Vitra Katsudon. The guest says no rice. Dennis whips up shrimp fried rice. Perfect as usual. One bite and the guest basically melts. Dennis notices the kid came in sighing and asks if something's wrong. The boy waves it off, then launches into a speech about how weak-minded everyone around him is. He's been kicked from his party, hates lazy adventurers, and plans to become Silverwing's strongest wizard. The boy introduces himself as Vivia Strange, pays up, and leaves vowing to come back for shrimp fried rice. Next visit, he's even louder, bragging he's joining the local top group Night Mist Troupe and will soon be in Silverwing. Dennis quietly hopes he finds a real party. After Vivia leaves, Dennis goes shopping. Passing adventurers mention how their Captain Hopper deliberately sent Vivia to the 5th floor. To test him, Dennis's face darkens. He drags them into an alley and beats the info out of them, then rushes back to tell Atelier they're closing for the day. She looks worried. He smiles and tells her not to. Meanwhile, Vivia is on the 5th floor running from goblins, vines snaring his feet, forgetting his own spells and panicking. A girl appears, cuts him free, and casts the right counterspell. She says her party left her too. Maybe they should wait for rescue together. Vivia admits no one is coming for him either. As goblins close in, he tries to act heroic and runs out to face them, casting his weak defensive spell. Just before the goblins break through, a masked figure drops in, traps them all in a giant cooking pot, and scolds Vivia. The monster is, of course, Dennis. He rips off his budget mask, smacks the boy on the head for trying a suicide stunt, and drags him along. Vivia points to where the girl should be. They find only ancient bones. Later, they learn she was Cynthia Dread, an adventurer who vanished on the 5th floor 13 years ago. They bury her. Dennis mentions myths of fallen adventurers' spirits protecting the living. Vivia cries, thanks her for saving him, and vows to become a wizard who protects girls like her. At the Night Mist Troupe's headquarters, a man berates Bachel for taking too long with her reports. Later, she discovers the mismatched numbers were caused by her senior's sloppy work. Her stomach growls as she realizes she has had no lunch or dinner, and all the restaurants are closed. Then she remembers the new place in town. By the time she gets there, Atelier is locking up and she feels crushed. But Atelier notices and brings her inside, asking Dennis to serve one last meal. Vivia and Henrietta watch as Bachel orders the daily special and sits down. When Dennis serves the food, she can't believe how good it looks. The back and forth makes Bachel laugh for the first time in ages. Then suddenly tears spill out. She thinks about the kind of life she's fallen into, endless insults and long nights, and about her family who sacrificed for her to become a wizard. The next morning, Bachel hits snooze at 3 a.m., exhausted from an all-nighter. She rushes to meet her team and gets scolded again. In the dungeon, she saves her senior from a wolf with wind magic but is accused of trying to embarrass him and forced to apologize. Nearby, Henrietta and Vivia notice Bachel walking alone with a strange look and follow her to a tower. She is on the edge, ready to jump. As she steps off, Henrietta lunges and catches her mid-fall, while Vivia casts Palm Below to soften the landing. Back at the restaurant, Atelier walks past Dennis without a towel, asking about laundry. Henrietta walks in with an unconscious Bachel on her back, while Vivia, already disturbed by Atelier's casual nudity, mutters about weird business tactics. A few hours later, Bachel's captain, Hopper, shows up to apologize for the trouble. Hopper's level is 51, far beyond the average adventurer. Dennis politely asks to let Bachel rest, but Hopper refuses, throwing a contract on the table. Reading it makes Dennis furious. They've basically enslaved her. The argument escalates. Hopper crushes a mug with one hand and declares that his party is the law here. Dennis and Hopper stare each other down. Hopper sneers about Silverwing controlling nobles while his troop controls this small town, even suggesting no one would care if the little restaurant burned down. Dennis is about to punch him when the door opens. Katie, all crimson hair and Silverwing insignia, steps inside with a bright smile and says the place looks great. Hopper freezes when he recognizes her and realizes who Dennis used to be. Before Dennis can stop her, she casually reveals he was once her best partner in Silverwing. The entire room is stunned. Hopper's hands start to shake and he orders the contract burned, declares Batchel free and rushes out. Henrietta and Vivia watch quietly as Dennis takes Katie's order. Atelier brings Batchel downstairs for a meal. Dennis tells her to eat before it gets cold. She takes one bite, then devours the rest so fast and adorably that everyone at the table smiles. At Silverwing headquarters, Katie overheard members whispering about the captain's foul mood and the team's struggles with new quests. She ran into Vigo, who quickly dismissed the others and demanded to know why she had been meeting Dennis. Katie brushed off his suspicions with a joke, but in truth she had invited Dennis back to Silverwing because the group was falling apart. Dennis, however, had refused, saying he enjoyed his stress-free life as a chef, even if most of his customers were eccentric. Back at the restaurant, business was booming. Bachel had moved in and was helping out, though she admitted keeping busy eased her anxiety. Henrietta praised Dennis's cooking as always, and he teased her for still not paying her bill. Atelier had been learning to cook under Dennis's guidance, which made him proud but also protective. He confessed privately to Vivia that he had seen her with a boy and was worried they were more than friends. Vivia told him to simply ask, but Dennis panicked at the idea of sounding creepy. Later, Atelier rushed off again and Dennis, unable to sit still, dragged Vivia to keep an eye on her. They followed her into town like awkward stalkers, growing increasingly alarmed when the boy led her into a jewelry shop. Meanwhile, Henrietta confided in Batchel about her money troubles and feared Dennis would eventually throw her out. As Dennis and Vivia fretted outside the shop, a thief used wind magic to snatch an old woman's bag and flee. Dennis gave chase with Vivia's magical boosts, showing off the speed that once made him famous in Silverwing. The thief vaulted to a roof with wind magic, but Dennis climbed after him using sheer strength. Ahead on the street, Henrietta intercepted the man from above and subdued him cleanly. Dennis caught up, praised her quick action, and retrieved the bag. Back at the restaurant that evening, Dennis told everyone he had suspected Atelier of having a boyfriend. Vivia clarified nothing was proven yet, while Henrietta teased Dennis about being lonely. Atelier then entered with a box she had been saving her allowance for. Inside was not a ring, but a bracelet meant for Dennis as thanks for teaching her to cook. Realizing his mistake, Dennis tried it on, making Atelier smile. Elsewhere, Captain Vigo went to a mansion for a long-delayed meeting with an unknown figure. The next day at the restaurant, Dennis sent Atelier outside to clean, but an old man came in right then. He looked like a harmless customer, yet burst into tears when he saw Lady Atelier. Henrietta immediately assumed he was some creepy admirer and almost scolded him, but he explained that he was Stevens, the former head butler of the famous Houseworks, the biggest mage family in the kingdom. Dennis, who clearly didn't read the news, was shocked to learn Eight's background. Stevens said her uncle had thrown her out by claiming she was illegitimate, but now a will had surfaced, naming her the true heir. The royal court wanted her back to set things right. Atelier clung to Dennis, saying she didn't want to return to her old life. Stevens muttered about how tragic it was that she was stuck in a peasant restaurant, which almost got him thrown out on the spot. Dennis calmed down, but admitted Stevens had a point. Atelier really was more like royalty than a waitress. He gently told her that sooner or later she would have to face her past. She finally agreed to go back if Dennis came with her, which made him proud. A few hours later, Dennis dressed up, Vivia threw on a detective-style coat just for fun, and the girls promised to handle the restaurant. Atelier came out in a blue dress looking adorable, but nervously repeated that she didn't want to go, which Dennis found amusing because it was the most she'd spoken all month. Stevens, still acting like a bossy butler, asked if the young lady and her servants were ready, which grated on Dennis's nerves. They traveled by carriage to the capital. Vivia stared out the window like a tourist while Dennis looked uneasy about being back. They arrived at Houseworks, where a legal officer welcomed them. Atelier had to give a blood sample to prove her identity. She hated needles, nearly fainted, and Dennis ended up carrying her. The officer explained her father had been a master of hypnosis magic and her uncle had poisoned him out of jealousy, then branded Atelier as illegitimate. A magical globe test was supposed to prove her true parentage. The first test confirmed her as her father's daughter, but when they tried her mother's blood, the crystal dissolved into black sludge. Her uncle smugly claimed this proved she was a mistake. The court split the inheritance. Joseph got the family fortune, while Atelier only received the books and magical knowledge. Dennis noticed Stevens hiding a wound and realized the butler had faked the test under Joseph's orders. After exposing him, Dennis nearly lost his temper but calmed down for Atelier's sake. They were led to the library of her inheritance, which turned out to be a dusty storage room hiding a secret basement filled with priceless magical texts. Atelier cheerfully said she wanted to give them to the restaurant. The next morning, Vivia bumped into a mysterious man who looked exactly like Dennis but gave off a completely different vibe. The man disappeared into the shadows with a girl named Fiorenzo. A few days later, Bachel was outside Dennis's restaurant, trying to control the huge crowd that had appeared ever since word spread about the rare books Atelier inherited. Inside, Henrietta and Vivia happily ate as usual, while customers got rowdy over the legendary books. Dennis had to shout at them to leave if they were done eating because, as he said, this was a kitchen, not a library. One man in a turban asked for a book because it had a cure for his wife's illness. Dennis simply looked at Atelier and she agreed to lend it just once. That opened the floodgates with others wanting books too, but Dennis glared them away. The man thanked Atelier like she was royalty and bachelted out the door. Business stayed hectic. Dennis cooked at lightning speed using magic, worrying Vivia that he'd burn himself out. Later, Dennis fainted from fever, flashing back to his childhood. He remembered standing in the rain, cold and hungry, returning a lady's dropped wallet instead of keeping it, and being invited to her home for a hot meal. That taste had changed his whole life. He woke up to find everyone hovering over him, saying he'd collapsed. Still worried about the restaurant, he tried to get up, but Bachel said they had already closed for the day. Seeing Atelier's sad face, he apologized and drifted back to sleep. Vivia guessed it was just a cold, but figured Dennis was exhausted from non-stop work since the trip to the capital. They left him to rest while Atelier stayed quietly by his bedside, putting the ice pack back on his head and blaming herself for his state. Outside, Henrietta and Vivia sat on the stairs wishing they could help. Bachel suggested porridge because food heals everything. Henrietta got excited, put on her armor, and went to the kitchen, dragging out a giant slab of meat that obviously didn't belong in porridge. She drew her sword to slice it, causing Vivia to panic before she cut the shelves. Bachel arrived with ice and found the two of them bickering. The team turned into a cooking think tank. Merchant Palvo appeared trying to sell things at half price, including a magic rice cooker. Everyone went silent when they realized the cooker had a porridge mode, making their fancy fire magic plans pointless. Later, Atelier joined them, cracked eggs like a pro, and started stirring. While she worked, Henrietta randomly confessed she disliked leather shoes because her family once tried eating them. Apparently, they're technically from animals. Bachel teared up. Vivia begged them to stop talking before it got worse. That night, Dennis woke to find Atelier bringing him egg porridge. One spoonful reminded him of his mentor's fried rice. Proud, he asked if she made it. She showed off her stirring skills, then innocently added that Palvo actually cooked the porridge, leaving Dennis wide awake wondering what that shady merchant had been doing in his kitchen. The next morning, the town looked peaceful again. Henrietta strolled through the market humming a happy tune, swinging her arms like she was in her own music video. Vivia bumped into her and almost fell over at the sight of her gigantic backpack. Back at the restaurant, Buckle and Atelier arrived to find Dennis packing supplies while proudly sporting the shiny bracelet Atelier had given him. Spotting her still in her apron, Dennis told her she didn't need to wear it everywhere. She refused with a small pout. She liked it. Moments later, Henrietta and Vivia came in fully geared up, double-checked the essentials, towels, soap, buckets, like a mom on a road trip. Everything ready, they headed to the bathhouse before the feast. There, Vivia almost fainted at Dennis's physique. Dennis flexed like a pro. Vivia instantly begged to know the secret. Dennis casually replied, 2,000 handstand push-ups a day. Everyone knew he had to be joking, or maybe not. He then mocked Vivia for being weaker than a broomstick. Vivia argued that as a mage he didn't need muscles. Henrietta, meanwhile, happily shampooed Atelier's silky hair like they were at a spa. Clean and refreshed, they returned to a dining table stacked with food and drinks worthy of a king. Dennis asked Henrietta, as the group's food enthusiast, to do the honors. She froze like dry spaghetti and gave a stiff thank you speech until Dennis told her to relax. She snapped back to her goofy self and proudly announced she'd landed a job with the Night Order, earning a standing ovation. Vivia then admitted he'd joined a small new party as his first step toward being a great mage. Bachel shared her own plan to become a teacher at the Magic Academy before going home. Dennis raised a toast to everyone's new chapters. The barbecue kicked off. Atelier showed Bachel her grilling skills, while Vivia felt bittersweet. Happy for his friends, sad they'd soon part ways. Dennis called him and Henrietta idiots for hesitating and told them to follow their chosen paths. The mood lifted again. Just as they were about to eat, Palvo was already shoveling rice into his mouth. Dennis recognized the shady guy and warned him to keep his hands off his poster girl, but thanked him for the rice cooker idea. Palvo offered top-tier Hajin beef as an apology, which Dennis sliced mid-air into perfect cubes. Everyone devoured the feast, while Palvo sulked that Atelier was feeding Dennis instead of him. She gave him one bite. He promptly fainted from a nosebleed. After dinner, Vivia finally asked about Dennis's last name. Dennis explained he'd taken Blacks from the lady who adopted him, but stopped using it after a fight when he hit level 99. He'd left to prove himself, joined the Silver Wing Battalion, but never reached level 100. The room went quiet. Meanwhile, two regular customers found the restaurant closed and got harassed by thugs. They fired back, literally using magic to punish the attackers, only to notice smoke rising nearby. At the same time, Dennis and the others, tipsy and happy, also saw the fire. Dennis sprinted, praying it wasn't his place. Reality was cruel. The restaurant burned to the ground. The crowd shouted for water magic. The tied-up arsonist yelled, "Dennis deserved it," and revealed the Silver Battalion. A Nightmas party wanted him destroyed. Inside the charred remains, Dennis stood silent, memories flooding back. Henrietta cried. Vivia and Bachel blamed themselves. Dennis assured them they'd done nothing wrong, but realized he'd made too many powerful enemies. Vivia urged revenge, but Dennis said he was just grateful no one was hurt. Revenge wasn't so simple. Nobles and top parties could crush him. He forced a smile, told everyone to go home, and quietly walked away. Vivia asked where the fiery Dennis had gone. Dennis answered that his head was cooler now. He checked the vault, money still safe. Atelier asked if she could still stay with him. Dennis apologized for her father's books lost in the fire. She said she didn't care about the books. What hurt was seeing him look so sad. They fist bumped, and Dennis promised to visit once things settled down. Outside the ruins of the restaurant, Vivia and the girls find a crowd waiting. When Dennis appears with Atelier, Bachel accuses him of sneaking off in the night, and Henrietta calls him a coward. Vivia explains Dennis's nature. He'll protect others but won't care if he himself gets hurt. The three shout that they care about him and won't let him leave alone. They're all outcasts, ready to be cast out again if needed, but this time they'll stand with him. The townsfolk declare Dennis belongs there. The girls demand Dennis stop his lone wolf act and fight together with them. Vivia urges him to hold on to what's precious. Atelier tugs his shirt. Dennis drops his bag and agrees to fight. Everyone cheers. Henrietta blushes, embarrassed at calling him a coward, and changes the subject to naming their team. 8 proposes Outcast's restaurant. Dennis finds it rough but fitting. Vivia proclaims Dennis the leader and asks for a speech. Dennis declares they'll crush their enemies and serve justice to those who burned his dream. The next morning, the newly named Outcast team heads to the capital. Dennis shocks them with news that Jean Blacks, his foster parent and head chef of Black's restaurant, is level 100, a status so rare it's reserved for kings and legends. Dennis clarifies that Jean reached level 100 purely through cooking, making her weak in combat but unrivaled in the kitchen and well-connected to the powerful. That's why he wants to ask for her help. Dennis walks up to Black's restaurant, recalling how he once told his master she had nothing left to teach him. Inside, the staff are stunned to see him. Seeing his master again, Dennis shyly greets her. She calls him the fried rice idiot, making him feel at home. She notes he looks better than before and asks if he's found his answer. He admits she may have been right about him never hitting level 100. She immediately guesses he's not back just to chat. Dennis explains he heard from a friend in Silverwing about a huge upcoming banquet where the Judge Joseph Houseworks, Captain Hopper of Night Mist, and Captain Vigo of Silverwing will be present. Jean instantly recognizes the weight of the names. Dennis says he doesn't know their scheme, but knows it's the perfect chance to strike. He only asks her for the date and location of the dinner. Easy intel for a world-famous chef. Jean asks what he's planning. As he clutches the bracelet that symbolizes what's precious to him, Dennis answers that he must do the worst thing a cook can do. Jean was shocked to hear something so extreme from her foster son Dennis after such a long time apart. Dennis admitted he hadn't fully planned things, but explained that he was doing everything for the people who loved his cooking and believed in his dream restaurant. Jean felt proud of how much he had learned, but reminded him that there was still one last secret she had never taught him, the way to reach level 100. Dennis wished he had known it sooner, but accepted the challenge ahead. Meanwhile, Captain Vigo prepared for an important meeting. His past was harsh. He had grown up poor with a sick brother, learned to manipulate wealthy people for food, and eventually turned violent, burning down a mansion and leaving his brother behind. Through years of ruthless fighting and clever schemes, he rose through the adventurer ranks, took control of the Silver Fang Party, renamed it the Silver Wing Battalion, and began making shady deals with nobles to gain power. At the secret meeting, Vigo joined Sir Joseph, Captain Hopper, and a corrupt royal judge. They celebrated their plan to control the kingdom from the shadows. A waiter then served them a final dish: simple fried rice. The men were surprised at how delicious it was and wanted to hire the chef. The waiter left, and Vigo silently judged the three men, already planning to use and betray them later to become a national hero. But when he tasted the rice, he realized it was familiar. The chef himself soon entered the room. It was Dennis, back to confront the people who had destroyed his restaurant. He demanded justice for what they had done. Dennis unleashed his intimidation skill, making the three nobles panic and confess to their crimes, including ordering the destruction of his restaurant and covering it up. Unknown to them, Vivia had been recording everything with wind magic and broadcasting it across the capital. When Vigo tried to attack, Vivia escaped. Looking outside, Vigo saw powerful nobles listening to the live transmission below. Dennis smiled, welcoming Vigo to his new restaurant. Having successfully exposed the entire group's corruption, the royal mages arrived at the party and the crowd immediately began whispering about the shocking confessions they had just heard. People were furious that the nation's most valuable magic books had been destroyed, and even more outraged that the royal judge was involved. Dennis pointed out that the mages upheld the law, so he didn't need to punish the villains himself. But Vigo wasn't finished. Angry at being exposed, he blew a hole through the wall and confronted Dennis outside. He admitted that he had expected Dennis to get in his way someday. With his sword glowing with energy, he challenged him, promising to make his end painful. Dennis, unfazed, summoned his cleavers and the two clashed. Vigo used his earth magic to create rising stone platforms and hurled rocks at Dennis, cutting his arm. Dennis blocked with a frying pan and countered with flames, but the captain's raw power overwhelmed him. As they fought, Dennis remembered when he had first joined the Silverwing party. Katie had introduced him, and Vigo had laughed at the idea of a chef adventurer. Still, Katie convinced him to accept Dennis, saying his cooking boosted morale. Dennis recalled moments from those early days, making hamburgers that re-energized the party, receiving genuine thanks from Katie, and even quietly comforting an expelled member with rice balls. He also remembered arguments with Vigo, who believed only by constantly pushing for power could they survive, while Dennis cared more about supporting people through food. Back in the present, the two seemed evenly matched until Vigo unleashed a skill that shattered Dennis's cleaver. Dennis recognized it as a deadly ability and pulled back, finally taking the fight seriously. Vigo taunted him, saying he was still just a pampered child pretending to be strong. Dennis tried to stall with frying pans and even filled the area with fog, but he was forced onto the defensive. The difference between level 99 and 100 became clear. Dennis struggled to keep up and was thrown back hard. Everything slowed as he heard his friends cheering for him. He thought about why he was even fighting and whether he should have chosen a simpler path, just running his restaurant, cooking for people, and maybe reaching level 100 without risk. He remembered Jean telling him he would probably stop at level 99 because he lacked something more. As he lay exhausted, Dennis realized his true motivation wasn't simply to cook dishes like Jean's fried rice. What mattered was the warm feeling it gave him and the smiles it created for people in tough times. He wanted to give that same hope and energy to others. Vigo charged for a final strike, but Dennis suddenly understood Jean's lesson, that reaching level 100 was about heart, not just power. He blocked the blow, and flames erupted around him in a blazing aura. Finally, Dennis accepted that his path was to protect people's smiles as the #1 chef. After reaching level 100, Dennis gained a new ability and used it against Vigo in their fight. He jumped high into the air, slammed Vigo into the ground, and activated a powerful skill called Forced Eviction. The attack crushed Vigo's armor and pinned him down with overwhelming force. Everyone watching, including Vivia, realized this was Dennis's unique skill unlocked at the max level. Jean, watching from a distance, was impressed with her student's strength. When the fight ended, Dennis was exhausted but victorious. The Outcast party caught him before he collapsed and congratulated him. He jokingly asked for fried rice, and his friends promised to make some and celebrate. Atelier returned his bracelet, and the two shared a small, wholesome moment. Jean quietly left, feeling Dennis no longer needed her guidance. Soon after, the culprits, including Vigo and Joseph, were arrested. Katie asked Jean how Dennis had managed to break his limit. Jean explained that reaching level 100 wasn't about raw strength, but about finding your true purpose. While Jean had done it to master cooking, Dennis had done it to protect and support the people who enjoyed his food. Even his unique skill reflected that, letting him kick out troublemakers from his territory. Katie found it funny that his skill didn't seem related to cooking at all. Back at the restaurant, Dennis's friends teased him about how quickly he recovered from his wounds. They then revealed the new building plans for his restaurant, which had been burned down. Dennis was happy but surprised at some of their extravagant ideas, like a giant bath taking up half the first floor, a huge fish tank in the middle, and a basement for staff to stay in. He gently rejected most of these changes, wanting to keep the cozy feel of the place. Despite the disagreements, construction went quickly thanks to Polvo's connections. The new restaurant was finished in record time. On opening day, Vivia took a break from adventuring. Henrietta arrived in her new role as a knight, and Bachel came as an instructor at the Royal Magic Academy. Everyone gathered to celebrate. Dennis put up the new sign for Outcast Restaurant, though he wondered if people would like the name. His friends reassured him it sounded good. Inside, the place looked simple and familiar, which disappointed some of them at first. But Dennis reminded them he had never agreed to the wilder designs. Once open, he served them amazing food that made them happy, and he thanked them for teaching him he didn't have to give up on what mattered to him. The old regulars also returned, and the Outcast team gave them a warm welcome to the new chapter of their restaurant.